So, hello everyone. Welcome to Figure It Out with Fatima. Happy Tuesday? Tuesday it is, yes. Can't remember even what day it is. But, anyways, hope you're having a wonderful week and a great Tuesday. Today, I have a special guest with me on the podcast, Spiros. But before we start, let me make sure that if you're watching, we're on live on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Please feel free to kind of put any questions on the chat. We have access to the questions, so whether you're watching on YouTube or on LinkedIn, just put your questions through on the comments and just we'll make sure to cover it. My name is Fatima El-Wakeel. I've worked across different industries, worked in automotive, FMCG, hospitality. I'm also a researcher at the University of Cambridge and on the General Assembly of the University of Manchester. My mission in life is very clear. I'm on a mission to really demystify how to create strategies for emerging tech. And with that, I think I'll hand it over to Spiros so that he can also introduce himself.
Thanks, Fatima. First of all, thanks for having me.
Oh.
So, hi everyone. I'm Spyridon Arsenis, but everyone, like Fatima did, calls me Spiros, the shorter version. I have worked since forever on data. I'm an LSE and TESX alumni, also Democritus University in Greece, but anyway, let's not go down that path. And for the past 11 and a half years, I have been with Unilever, and it's primarily on delivering big data programs and transformation programs. And Fatima, back to you to introduce the topic.
Yes. So one of the topics that's really important, I guess, when it comes to data is supplier strategy. And the reason why I was like, we had that chat, Spiros and I, about the topics and what and we thought, like, to be honest, I've worked in data for ages, and Spiros is one of the best people when it comes to contracts, supplier management, and supplier strategy. And if I wanted to chat about that, then I can't chat to anyone else but Spiros. Like, he knows his stuff really, really well. So first of all, thank you very much for making the time to make sure that we share the knowledge with everyone. Really appreciate that. And what we're going to speak about today is supplier strategy. So tell me a bit about when you think about supplier strategy, because you have a different kind of view. And an example that you always give, which I think is very, very, it just clarifies everything. So maybe you can share that with the listeners.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for your kind words, by the way. And I have to give a shout out to the procurement team that over the years have been immense help in order for me to understand more and to become better at my job. But let's start with that example that Fatima was saying.
Please.
Let's assume for a moment that you have a big garage with many vehicles. You have a Toyota Hilux, basically your basic pickup. You have a limo, a Maybach. You have a Ferrari. You have a John Deere tractor. And you also have an old bunker Zastava from Yugoslavia that doesn't even exist anymore, just to be clear. If you just need to go between point A and point B, and you have no constraints, it doesn't matter. Any of the vehicles will do it, right? But let's start adding conditions. If you need to go as fast as possible and you can use the German Autobahn, most likely you would go for the Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
If the road is a bit more tricky, a bit more bumpy, you also need to carry a bit of stuff, most likely you will go with the Hilux.
Yeah.
If at the same time you need to, I don't know, do agricultural stuff, most likely you will need to use the John Deere tractor. And if you are rich beyond imagination and you have a driver, you might use the Maybach because you want to actually do meetings while you go from point A to point B. On the other hand, if you have zero money, you are happy that you have the Zastava to get you from point A to point B. And the whole idea, and what we will be discussing now, and Fatima will introduce in a second, is we always have choices. We just always need to understand what constraints we have.
Yeah.
And with that, Fatima,
Okay.
please.
I think it's good. As you can see, we've chatted about those like before, and because we work together, I think it's one of the things that we always discuss when it comes to suppliers. I love the example because the petrol head in me is just like, this is amazing. Like I said, I worked in automotive, and you guys know. So yeah. Um, so I think that example is really good because it shows like there are so many options, but yet there are things that within the organization, and having worked in different organizations, I feel like the budget is a factor, the skills within the team is a factor, and we'll speak about other things like onshore, offshore, whether it's insource or outsource it. There's so many things, but I really love that example because it just shows you clearly um, the different options and what to pick from. And with that, I just wanted to chat about it because those of you who know me know that I'm quite like tech agnostic, supplier agnostic, because I feel like, and we had that chat several times, like every supplier is really good. And my point is that that supplier is in the market for a reason, especially if they've been in the market for so long. Like if you speak about the Googles of the world, the Microsoft, the Amazon, like those have been in the market for so long. So they're really doing what they're doing good. It's all about when I'm thinking of a supplier or when an organization really is thinking of a supplier, it's more about how this relationship of working together, how to make it work. Can we get the conversations going? Strategically, are we aligned? So it's beyond even the service, it's the strategic part of it, which we'll discuss later. But what's your thoughts on that? Because I know that you also have some thoughts on that, Spiros.
So I have primarily worked with Microsoft Azure and a bit with Informatica, a bit with Salesforce, a bit with GCP, and a bit with AWS. So a bit with everyone. But the reality is that whatever platform you use, it depends on what you need to do and what is the strategy of your organization. If, for example, you use Power BI as a presentation layer, you might want to go with the Microsoft stack. If you use Tableau, you are a bit more agnostic. But one thing to remember, most of the big third-party developers and support teams, DevOps, basically they have experience and they have centers of excellence across the different platforms. Mm-hmm. And also the same platforms have their own professional teams. Huh?
Exactly. Yes, it is. But I like what you said about, you've given some examples here about like you've worked with Azure, you've worked with GCP, I've worked with Microsoft and GCPL. And I think the good thing is we've worked with similar suppliers, but I know something that you've mentioned several times when you're in meetings or discussing things is the end-to-end value chain. So one of the things that we look at always is, oh, will that work together as a stack, the whole tech stack? Would it be speaking to each other? What do we think about? And it's not only it's not like if I'm taking a decision on a cloud provider, I'm not separating the visualization tool and I'm not separating the the visualization tool or the other technical tools that are needed, like as the steps of the process. But you also think about the dev versus the support, exactly. So maybe you can explain that a bit.
Sure. But first of all, something to your earlier comment. In reality, with APIs, usually you can do stuff across platforms. That's not a question. But it also depends on your strategy, your cost sensitivity, and also you get big volume discounts if you stick with one or two rather than try to pick up everything from small bits from every bit of supplier. But to your question, when we do development, we usually use one third-party agency or in-source team, depending on the situation. And it's very easy to forget that after it goes live and while it's still getting involved, you need a support team. And depending on the requirements, it might be 24/7, it might be 10 hours a day, only weekdays. It depends. But it's something that you always need to consider when you are thinking of what we are going to cover today, because it impacts how you select your partners, and also it impacts how you structure your contracts.
Yes. So I think that's the important piece when you think of the value chain. It's this kind of the connections in terms of like connections, but also like the volume that you can get from one supplier, but your development versus your service or your how you're going to fix things if you need support. And with that, I think one of the things that we were going to chat about today as well is, or the other thing that people we would recommend that people would think about based on experience the hard way is the location. So location is one of the very important things. So if you think about strategy, as we said, we mentioned several things, but one of the things that are really important in strategy is the location of the supplier.
Indeed.
So onshore, offshores, pros and cons. What are your thoughts?
Okay, first of all, the car example was to feed into this conversation.
Yes.
You can have
The rest of the story, please.
you can have onshore, so basically in the same country, and even onshore it can be same office location, same city, same country, different levels. Nearshore, which is, for example, if you are based out of UK, anywhere in Europe, if you are based out of North America, usually LATAM, or completely offshore, which means for people in the UK it might be LATAM or India as the primary locations, but not exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
All of them have benefits, right? You can find great people across. That's not a question.
Yeah.
It might have been a question 10, 15, 20 years ago, but not anymore. The biggest thing that you need to consider is cost, control, how much you need to be near them,
Yes.
and also where are your stakeholders. For example, if all your stakeholders are based out of North America, having everything based out of Asia, not necessarily great, because it means that you have very little, if any, time overlap.
Yes.
But what are
And
your thoughts?
I think that's time zones is such an important thing to consider. And I think this is the bit that organizations sometimes, when they think about the strategy, they look at the costs, but then they miss the part where actually part of the cost is the ability to speak and be more efficient. So I've, especially with the university, like we're looking with different organizations, having interviews and, understanding more about their supplier strategy. And yes, Latam, I think the three main areas or the four main areas that we've seen is obviously Latam, because it's the port, it's there. India, you have been in the Middle East there, and obviously parts of Europe, Poland, and there are some countries around. Portugal, exactly.
Hungary.
And then in the Middle East, you have Dubai, you have Egypt, there's certain countries around, which is brilliant. So there is enough skill set. I think that's the point that Spyros raised. Skill set is all over the place, all over the world, and time zone is really very critical. I've seen organizations where they had challenges because they put their resources in certain areas where the people, the stakeholders, are in a completely different time zone. And then it is challenging for both the developers, because obviously they want to do really a good job, but also the stakeholders are getting very frustrated because they can't get the stuff done because it's only 1 or 2 hours a day. And by the time it's done, then they have to wait for the next day. So I think what you've said is really brilliant, and it is really important, because when it comes to offshore or onshore and all that, there's so many pros and cons. And this is the bit where when organizations think about supplier strategy, it's a holistic thing. It's not just the cost. So I love that.
I'm glad. There is also another element, right? Most of the big players, Capgemini, Cognizant, Deloitte, Accenture, Infosys, TCS, IBM, KPMG, Ernst & Young,
You're
Uh,
trying not to forget. We're not trying to say everyone here, so we excluded everyone. So we're not trying to mock it.
but most of them will have big scale in
Yeah.
specific markets, but they might have a more of a niche presence in others. So,
Yes.
for example, if you, for some reason, you need your support to be based out of Brazil, specifically Brazil, it might be that one of your preferred suppliers has a very small team, and
Mhm.
therefore it's very difficult to scale up, very difficult to meet
Exactly.
what you need.
And I think this goes back to the point when we were speaking about it's a partnership. I think I think we were discussing that before even we went live. It's having the partnerships, thinking more strategically about the supplier strategy. So it's not just what the whole it's the whole relationship, and part of it is the location. As you said, if we want someone from Brazil and the supplier doesn't offer it, then straight away you just need to really do what's best for your supplier strategy for the organization. Okay.
But you I'm not threatening
Go
you.
ahead.
No, but you had a very good point before we started about the type of relationship which ties up with
Yes.
this. And
Yes.
can you please share with the audience what you were explaining to me?
So, so we were discussing because we both worked we've been working together, but we've worked in different teams as well across the years. And one of the things that I've learned really is I don't look at supplier as my supplier. Supplier is my partner for the job that I'm doing. So it's more of a partnership, and it's a win-win situation. So it's also how can I support them and they support me. So I've been in situations where the organizations I've worked for, without mentioning any names, so I don't get into trouble, the organizations thought about this relationship very, very strategically. And we used to test things before they're in the market. So the supplier would come to us, was like, you know what, have this, and it's still in development. Would you like to pilot test it? And we'd be like, oh yeah, we will be. That's fine. And then we would give feedback to the supplier or partner, and we say, you know what, we've tested that. Maybe you should change this and this and that. And sometimes we would even suggest functionalities to our suppliers. So I remember at certain points, it's like working with a supplier and working on something, and I'm like, oh, we just need this thing. They're like, we don't have it. I'm like, yeah, we know, but we want it. Let's work together to create the functionality with you. And I think those are the best relationships. And this is like strategically for the growth of both the organization and the supplier.
Indeed. And there is also another element. We always use contracts, right?
Yes.
But the contracts, going full legal now, a complete contract that covers every single eventuality, it's next to impossible. So you need to have a partnership. So your incomplete contract, you can work out any changes, etc.
Mhm.
Very important, because if you are looking at more of the long run rather than a very short engagement, you need to have that relationship, that partnership.
That is true. And I've seen you've done that really well with suppliers. Like, I think when it comes to contracts, really, and I love how because I haven't heard that before, saying that the contract, although it's a legal agreement, it doesn't cover everything. Because there are situations where you need support from your supplier, or the supplier will need something from the organization, and it's not within the contract. And this is the bit where, okay, how do we, till we create a contract or till we update it, how we can make things work. And you've done that brilliantly. I think this can be an episode in itself, to be honest, like how you manage contracts. I think it's a skill set, which is brilliant.
Credit where is due. This lady has a real skill about focusing on one or two things on the contract negotiations that they matter, don't get me wrong, but she will stop everything until it's covered. And I fully respect that, because that's the way you need to do for things that matter to you.
And I think, oh, thank you, first of all. I really appreciate that. But I think it's team. And this is the bit where to be able to discuss, again, part of the supplier strategy is, and that's on both sides, I think we can be very open about it. Like the supplier would have the team that negotiates contracts, and the organization will have a team that will negotiate contracts. and it's the right skill set within the team, a person who can, like Pistorius was doing, is like have a full visibility of the contract, knows exactly how everything is working and negotiates it, but then again leaves certain points to certain individuals where people have special interest in certain topics and they can push, really they know what works right. um so I'd say, yeah, it's the contract negotiation, we definitely need an episode on that. um so I'm just looking at the time. Still have time. I think we definitely need a second episode of that. um what about within the contract? I'll go back to the contract because you
Go
said
for
like,
it.
yeah,
Go for it.
I kind of get hung up on certain things and really negotiate it, which, but the time and material, the costs, the fixed scope, and all that. Why don't you share a bit about how you think about that?
Sure. So TNM, time and material, is your most basic contract. You have rate cards, you have different seniority people, and you pay X amount of people, how many days, and you do the calculation. It has a bit of admin in terms of making sure that everything is covered, etc. But that is fine. Basically, it's timesheets. Uh, Tends to be fine if you have a good procurement team that has great rate cards,
Yes.
but it can take much longer because basically the incentive is to prolong things. Then on the other end, you have the fixed scope.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I want to move think A to point C from point B,
Mm-hmm.
and that is my scope. Uh, it works great. You need to have in the contract or the milestones, you need to have everything specifically called out,
Mm-hmm.
and you still have scope creep, which is something that comes everywhere, but in fixed scope, it's a big problem because it means either has something to go or the cost increases. Usually, a partner for small things might be okay,
Mm-hmm.
but the bigger things or more small things, it will come at a cost.
Yes.
And the third option is the hybrid. It's something in
Yeah.
between. So you don't use TNM, you don't use fixed scope, but you use a unit of measurement, complexity, or whatever it might be that the organizations agree, that you pay per delivery. And it works well when you know that the scope will continue changing and you don't have a complete visibility from the beginning until the end of the contract, particularly for big contract that it's multi-year or even a single year, but it's big scale. It is a way around. Uh, but it depends a lot on what you are going to do, how much you are willing to pay,
Yes.
and also one thing that you need to keep in mind, and that covers a previous topic that we said, is if you handling development and then you need to give support, the supporting either to the same supplier or different,
Mm-hmm.
you need to make sure that it's included in your contract, particularly if it is fixed scope. You need to have about knowledge transfer, ensuring that everything is signed off,
Yes.
because otherwise it's one of the things that the supplier would rightly say, so I'm sorry, it's not part of your contract, you need to pay XYZ extra to do it.
And I think this is the bit, that's the clarity on things when you're working on the contract, what is really in and out, the clarity of the roles and responsibilities, the scope. Like, I'd, if I'm negotiating or I'm discussing a contract and negotiating it, I'll be going through each point and just making sure that I covered everything and having the right people at the table when you're discussing different points. Like, not everyone needs to discuss the whole contract. We don't, if, for example, hypothetically, we're saying, okay, for that contract to be signed, we need 20 people because it touches 20 parts of the organization or 20 teams. I can't have the 20 teams all the time because that's obviously like will affect the flow of the business as usual. But it's how can you get the teams to work on their pieces, collate that, and then really negotiate the contract as a whole. So I think that's. But I love how you split it into T&M, fixed scope, and then the hybrid bit, which is quite. This is clarity. So this is a point in itself. If you're looking at a supplier strategy, think in your head: is it T&M? Is it fixed scope, or is it a hybrid model? But also, I think what would affect and yeah, thinking out loud is the size of the third party supplier.
Massively.
So the size of the supplier, the country that the supplier is located. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think it still like links obviously to what we discussed before, but I think with the point of the contract itself.
It definitely links. If you need to do something quite small, quite niche, you might be better off not going with one of the big suppliers because they can provide you a better deal. They might have some expertise that it's very niche. They have already done work that you want to replicate for your organization and so on and so forth. But as you go big, for example, let's say that you have a multinational company and you want to implement SAP, you want to implement, to migrate from Azure to AWS or anything of massive scale, you need someone who can provide a lot of, I'm sorry for their bodies, to do the work. So if you need someone to be able to provide hundreds of people, you need to be practical, right? There are big hubs for most companies. So in Europe, usually Poland is very big, India. But if, for example, I go to Greece to make it more close to home, it's unlikely that the companies, even if they have a presence, they will be able to provide everyone in that location because they also have other clients, right?
Oh, I agree. But I'll just build on the point that you've said and move to the next point because I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we cover this. Because you said moving from Azure to AWS, or you can move from AWS to Azure. We're not marketing anything here. Or, move to SAP, to Auto, whatever you're going to do, okay? I think the strategic partnership is really important because I've seen organizers, moving for the sake of moving doesn't really help because every supplier will have something flashy and something new that you want to like, oh, that's really good. I want it now. But my supplier doesn't provide it, but the other supplier has. Well, guess what? Your supplier will provide it in a couple of months. Or if you have this kind of strategic relationship, you can even pilot it with them. And I think this is the piece where thinking, and I'd love to kind of close this a bit with, or the conversation, end it with the strategic partnership versus just the contract. Because I think we've always, like the contracts, no matter how much the legality in it, this is not what gets the work done.
It's what protects both parties.
Exactly.
It ensures payments. But one thing that we need to mention as a parenthesis, if you handle personal data, if you need to have specific security requirements, those need to be part of the wider agreement because those are the kind of things that can break the camel's back, as they say.
You don't want to be in the news for the wrong reasons. So,
or find a percentage of your turnover. Closing the parentheses.
Yes.
I fully agree with you. And partnership is vital. It's fine if you do a tiny bit. Okay, you don't have a partnership, so be it. But anything that it's bigger, anything that touches the 20 areas that you said, you definitely need something more of a substantial relationship.
Yes.
And also, very practical, year on year or contract on contract, depending on the situation, your supplier needs to get some margin out of you, right?
Yes.
Everyone is for their profit. But if you have a long-term relationship, it's more likely that you will find an agreement rather than someone who is, if the supplier knows that you are shopping around every year, they might be less inclined. You tend to get better offer initially because they want to pull your business anyway, but you need to balance it out.
Yes, I agree. And I think this is the bit where thinking strategically is really important. Thinking of the supplier as a thinking of, yeah, suppliers or your tools that you want to use as supplier strategy rather than just a tick in the box. So part of your data strategy, going back to the data strategy piece, is your supplier strategy. And your supplier strategy is not just a contract. It's far beyond that.
Indeed.
So I think maybe we can wrap it up. So we've discussed.
We have
things.
to. We're out of time.
So we just want to, because we said it before we start. We said we try to, keep it to the 30 minutes, maybe give or take. But we're trying to. We were good with time today. But I think just to wrap it up, your supplier strategy is definitely part of your data strategy. We spoke about tech agnostic, supplier agnostic. We spoke about the value chain as a whole, location, onshore, offshore.
We need to do some at some point about insourcing, outsourcing.
Yes.
But not today.
I'll hold you. Okay. I'll come back to that. I'll be like, remember? So yes. We also spoke about the different types of contracts. You said T&M, you said fixed and
hybrid.
Hybrid, yes. We spoke about the size of the supplier, and the bit that I'm really passionate about is like the partnership. How will it work with both parties? I think we've seen examples where really suppliers have went out of their way to make things happen because you need that, and also organizations who went out of their way to just support the supplier with certain functionality, whether pilot testing or whatever, and just saying, you know what, we're going to help you with it. And I think this is the best, those are the best examples I've seen where really a supplier strategy did work. So with that, I want to thank Spyros. Thank you very much for making the time today, because I know you're very busy. Really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone who's with us on the live. If you have any questions, continue asking the questions or commenting in the comments. We both have access to it, and we'll make sure to answer. If you think you want us to deep dive into any of those subtopics, let us know, and we definitely will be more than happy to do another session. We were discussing that before today.
We did.
We want to make sure that we really provide as much knowledge and support to people within the profession. We're very fortunate to be where we are and to have the experience we have. So please just give us a shout if you want us to share any more about any of those topics. So thank you again. Thank you, Spyros. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Fatima. I really enjoyed it as well. And thank you everyone that tuned in. And it was a pleasure being able to speak about something that I'm actually interested in.
Yes.
Well, actually passionate, but
you're expert as well. So not only interested, but you're an expert in but thank you very much. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you soon and have an awesome Tuesday.
Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.